Hi everyone, welcome to Wings of Fire. Today we are going to start a new series in the journey of our learning. I'm calling this series The Inspire. As the name suggests, I'm going to bring you some stories of people who will definitely inspire you in your life. So before we dive into the topic, I'd like to call this topic the story of grit and determination. Before we dive into the topic, I want you to take a look at these two photographs. Remember this old gentleman. This is whom we are going to talk about. Many of you might have already guessed who he is. So let me get into the topic. We all know that India fought multiple wars with Pakistan, and two of the major wars were fought in 1965 and 1971. And we know what the result were. In both the wars, Pakistan surrendered to the Indian Army, or I should say, they were defeated by the Indian Armed Forces. Okay. This gentleman is none other than Major General Ian Cardozo. He was born in 1937 in Mumbai, and because of his fascination towards services, he joined the National Defence Academy at Katharpasla, Pune, and later on went on to get trained in the Indian Military Academy at Dehradun. Then he was commissioned as an officer in the Indian Army in 1954 in the 5 Gorkha Rifles, which he later on he also commanded the 1st Battalion of the 5 Gorkha Rifles. He was called as Kartoos Saab by his soldiers. Okay, now you might be wondering what this Kartoos means and why he was called as Kartoos Saab. It's a very funny story. His name Cardozo was so difficult to pronounce for a certain group of soldiers. So eventually he became Kartoos Saab. Kartoos is in Hindi it is nothing but cartridge. Cartridge is something which is related to a weapon, something like an ammunition shell. That's a cartridge. So he was referred to as Kartoos Saab. So in 1971, India fought this war with Pakistan as a liberation war for Bangladesh, which was erstwhile East Pakistan. Bangladesh before 1971 was under the regime of West Pakistan. It was almost sort of a dictatorship, and there were a lot of tensions that were happening in East Pakistan. Refugees were pouring into India in 1971, and India had to pitch in to do something. So that's how we got into the war. So a video about that war is something which will be done later on. Let's just focus on Major General Cardozo for today. Major General Cardozo was undergoing a course in the Defence Services Staff College at Wellington when his battalion was at war with Pakistan in Bangladesh. During the course of the war, the second in command of his battalion was lost in the battle, and the army headquarters ordered Major General Cardozo to come and take charge of the battalion and lead them into the battle. So on the orders of the army headquarters, he rushed to the spot and he took charge of the battalion and he led them into the war. They were part of the Battle of Sylhet, which is very famous in the 71 war history. We'll talk about it some other time. So during the course of the war, General Cardozo, as he was known as Kartoos Saab, led his men fiercely and with bravery into the war, for the motherland. Now, as the war was coming to an end, in an unfortunate incident, Major General Cardozo steps on a landmine and gets severely injured. Okay, when you step on a landmine, the first thing that gets injured are your limbs, the lower limbs, both the legs. So his both limbs are severely injured, and he's taken to the battlefield medical post, which is something like a portable battlefield hospital that is set up in battlefield to treat injured or wounded soldiers. So when he's brought to this medical post, he is told that one of his legs has to be amputated because it has been severely damaged, and there's a lot of gangrene in the leg. And such kind of amputation is generally done under the influence of a painkiller or something like a morphine. Unfortunately, on that particular day, the battlefield medical post did not have any morphine with them, and they said that they cannot do this procedure surgically. So imagine what he would have done. He immediately calls for his battalion soldier. His name was Bal Bahadur. He asks him where is his kukri. Okay, for someone who does not know what a kukri is a small knife kind of a weapon which is generally carried by Gorkhas, and this happens to be part of the uniform of the Gorkha regiment. It is something like a close combat weapon, wherein if you are on a man-to-man combat with an enemy, you can use this weapon and kill him. So he asks for his kukri, and Bal Bahadur takes his kukri out. The general, without even thinking for a second, tells Bal Bahadur, "Okay, cut off my leg." So imagine what Bal Bahadur would have thought. He said, "No, no, I'm not doing this." So without even a second thought, the general grabs the kukri and cuts off his own damaged leg. Can you imagine how that feels? I can't even imagine how that feels. But even at that particular stage, without any hesitation, he took a very bold decision and he cut off his own leg. Okay, from this story, we could take a lot of lessons back to us. But before going to the lessons, I'd like to tell you one more thing. This happened in 1971. After this incident, he recovered, he commanded a battalion and went on to become a major general in the Indian Army. That is a story of someone who's so brave, and that is why I want to call this story a story of grit and determination. Okay, even after the injury, he continued to serve in the army. Not just that, he was so fit physically, he kept himself physically so fit that even he was able to outsmart, outdo some of the able-bodied officers who were serving at that time in the forces. This is a story that I've heard. I believe it is true. So from this particular incident and from the life of Major General Cardozo, I'd like to take 3 important lessons which I want to share with you. When I read the story, when I got to know about the story, these are the 3 lessons that immediately came to my mind. So the first lesson goes like this: focus even in critical situations. Even at the stage where he is severely injured, he had 2 things in his focus. One was to stay alive, and the 2 was to lead his men into battle with bravery. To do this, he had to do something which probably none of us would ever think of doing. So even at the most painful moment of his life, he was able to focus. He knew if he had not cut off his leg that day, probably he wouldn't have survived, and probably we wouldn't be having someone to speak of today, someone so inspiring to remember. That is lesson number 1. And so the lesson number 2 is life has to go on, right? So even after his injury, even after losing a limb, he had an wooden leg. Imagine, he was a marathon runner even after that, and he continued to serve the Indian Army till around, I think, early 90s. So this story gives us the fact that no matter what comes in your way, how much ever troubles that you face in your life, how much ever problems that you face in your life, even the worst situations can always be turned around if you're ready to accept the fact that life has to move on despite whatever happening to you at that particular point in time. So that is the second lesson that I'd like to give you today. And the third and the last lesson is you have to prepare yourself mentally for every situation in your life. Like I said, life has to move on. It cannot stop at one point in time. But how do you come to the decision that life has to move on even after so many bad things happening to you? It is only possible when you prepare yourself mentally. Just condition your mind. Just prepare yourself mentally that whatever happens, I'll keep doing what I'm supposed to do. Like in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that just do your duty and don't expect anything in return. Something like that. So you have to focus on what is important and prepare yourself mentally so that you can march ahead in life no matter what happens behind you. Just leave everything aside. Be strong mentally. So these are the 3 lessons that I'd like to bring to you from Major General Cardozo's story. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I'll meet you soon with another inspiring story in the future. Take care and Jai Hind.